Marcus Chen sat alone at table 17, his $3 billion net worth unable to buy him the one thing he desperately needed, someone to share Valentine's Day with. When the young waitress approached with a single red rose, he braced for pity. But the words that came out of her mouth would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past, and set in motion a revelation that would bring the most powerful man in Silicon Valley to his knees. Hello friends, welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, please let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The chandeliers of Maison Lumiere cast dancing shadows across table 17, where Marcus Chen sat with the weight of 2 decades pressing against his chest. Around him, couples leaned close over candlelight, their laughter and whispered intimacies forming a symphony of connection that only amplified his isolation. His charcoal suit, tailored on Savile Row, fit perfectly. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, kept impeccable time. His wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux, tasted of complexity and age. None of it mattered. Valentine's Day had become his annual pilgrimage to pain, a deliberate choice to sit among the living while feeling like a ghost. The tech world knew Marcus Chen as the genius who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence, the visionary whose algorithms now powered everything from smartphones to smart cities. Forbes estimated his net worth at $3.2 billion. What they didn't know, what he never spoke about, was that he'd trade every dollar, every patent, every award on his shelf for 5 more minutes with the 2 people he'd loved most in this world. 23 years. That's how long it had been since the worst night of his life. Marcus took a slow sip of wine, letting the tannins coat his tongue as his mind drifted back, as it always did on this day. February 14, 2003. He'd been 28 years old, working 18-hour days at a struggling tech startup with his business partner Richard Ashford. Alina, his wife of 2 years, had been 9 months pregnant, her belly round with their first child, a daughter they'd already named Lily Rose after Alina's grandmother. He remembered kissing Alina goodbye that morning, his hand resting gently on her stomach, feeling their daughter kick. "Don't work too late," she'd said, her dark eyes warm with love. "This might be our last Valentine's Day as just the 2 of us." But he had worked late. He'd stayed at the office debugging code while Richard handled a critical investor meeting. And when his phone finally rang at 11:47 p.m., it wasn't Alina's voice on the other end. It was a nurse from St. Catherine's Hospital, her tone professionally sympathetic in that way that means your life is about to end. "Mr. Chen, you need to come immediately. There's been a complication." The words that followed had shattered him. Emergency C-section, catastrophic hemorrhaging, both mother and child lost. "I'm so sorry," the doctor had said, his face grave as Marcus stood in the hospital hallway unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to believe that the universe could be so cosmically cruel. He'd never even gotten to hold his daughter. They told him it was better that way, that the memories would be too painful. Richard had handled everything, the funeral arrangements, the cremation, the paperwork. His business partner had been his rock during those dark months, keeping the company afloat while Marcus drowned in grief. Within a year, their startup had exploded with success, but Marcus felt nothing as the money poured in. He'd thrown himself into work, building empire after empire, achievement after achievement, trying to fill a void that could never be filled. And every Valentine's Day for 23 years, he came here, to this restaurant, to this table, to punish himself with the sight of what he'd lost. "Excuse me, Mr. Chen." The voice startled him from his reverie. Marcus looked up to find a young waitress standing beside his table, her hands clasped nervously in front of her crisp white apron. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long chestnut hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold in the candlelight. There was something familiar about those eyes, but Marcus couldn't place it. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she continued, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I know you prefer not to be bothered when you dine alone, but I couldn't let tonight pass without." She trailed off, seeming to struggle with her words. Marcus recognized her now, Sophie, according to her name tag. She'd been working here for a few months, always professional, always keeping her distance as the senior staff had probably instructed. He appreciated that about this restaurant. They understood that some solitude was sacred. "It's fine," Marcus said gently, nodding the way her hands shook slightly. "Is there a problem with my meal?" "No, sir. Your meal is perfect. It's just—" Sophie reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a single red rose, its petals deep crimson, almost black in their intensity. She placed it carefully on the white tablecloth before him. "I wanted you to have this." Marcus stared at the rose, confusion furrowing his brow. "I don't understand. I didn't order." "It's not from the restaurant," Sophie interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper now. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, a breach of protocol that should have annoyed him but somehow didn't. Her eyes, those strange amber eyes, were glistening with unshed tears. "Mr. Chen, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen, please." Something in her intensity made Marcus's pulse quicken. He set down his wine glass and gave her his full attention. Sophie took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. 23 years ago, on Valentine's Day, a woman named Alina Chen was rushed to St. Catherine's Hospital. She had an emergency C-section. The doctors told her husband that she and the baby had died due to complications. The blood drained from Marcus's face. His hands gripped the edge of the table. "How do you know?" "But they didn't die," Sophie continued, her words tumbling out faster now as if she'd lose courage if she slowed down. "The baby survived. Alina survived, at least for a while. And that baby—" her voice cracked, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "That baby was named Lily Rose, but the people who took her from the hospital that night called her Sophie." The restaurant noise faded to a dull roar in Marcus's ears. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His vision tunneled until all he could see were those amber eyes, Alina's eyes, he realized with a jolt. His wife had had those exact same unusual golden brown eyes, a trait so rare he'd never seen it in anyone else. Until now. "That's not possible," Marcus whispered, but even as he said it, his heart was pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. "They showed me death certificates, both of them. I held the documents in my hands. The hospital confirmed." "The documents were fake," Sophie said, her voice steady now despite the tears flowing freely down her face. "Mr. Chen, Dad, someone lied to you. Someone wanted you to believe we were dead, and they wanted my mother to believe you'd abandoned us." The word "dad" hit Marcus like a physical blow. His hands were trembling now, his breath coming in short gasps. "This is insane, this is. If this were true, if you were really—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. The hope was too dangerous, the potential for heartbreak too immense. Sophie reached into her apron again and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges frayed from age and handling. She placed it on the table next to the rose. "My mother died 5 years ago, cancer, but before she passed she gave me this. She'd been searching for you for years, Mr. Chen. She never stopped loving you. She never believed you'd abandoned us, but she could never find you. Your name had changed in all the business records. You disappeared into your success." Marcus's hand shook as he reached for the envelope. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, but unmistakable. It showed him and Alina on their wedding day, her in a simple white dress, him in a gray suit, both of them laughing at something off camera. He had a copy of this exact photo in his home office, one of the few items he'd salvaged from that life before. But there was something written on the back in Alina's distinctive handwriting. "For Lily Rose, so she knows what love looks like. Your father loved us more than life itself. Never doubt that. Mom, February 14, 2008. 5 years after the night he thought she'd died." "Oh my God," Marcus breathed, his vision blurring with tears he'd held back for more than 2 decades. "Oh my God, Alina, you were alive." "She tried to find you," Sophie said, her own voice thick with emotion. "For 20 years she tried, but whoever did this covered their tracks well. She worked 3 jobs to raise me, always telling me stories about you, about how brilliant you were, how kind, how you'd never have left us willingly. She made me promise that if I ever found you, I'd tell you the truth." Marcus looked up at this young woman, his daughter, his Lily Rose, sitting across from him after 23 years of believing she was dead. She had Alina's eyes, but she had his nose, his chin, the same slight dimple in her left cheek that he saw every morning in the mirror. "Why now?" he managed to ask. "Why tonight?" Sophie gave him a sad smile. Because I finally figured out where to find you. One of the other waitresses mentioned that a billionaire comes here every Valentine's Day and sits alone, refusing all company. She said his name was Marcus Chen, and I thought, what are the odds? So I looked you up, and when I saw your picture, she touched her own face. I saw my face. I saw my mother's eyes in your photographs from when you were young, and I knew. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. Several nearby diners looked over, but he didn't care. He rounded the table and stood before Sophie, Lily Rose, his daughter, his child who'd been stolen from him, and saw her stand to meet him. May I, his voice broke, may I hug you? Sophie nodded, her face crumpling with emotion. And then Marcus Chen, the billionaire who'd spent 23 years as an island unto himself, wrapped his arms around his daughter and wept openly in the middle of the crowded restaurant, finally understanding that the universe hadn't been cruel that night. It had been robbed, they all had. And someone was going to answer for it. The private dining room at Maison Lumiere had been hastily prepared for them, the manager discreetly ushering Marcus and Sophie away from the curious stares of other patrons. Marcus sat across from his daughter. The word still felt surreal in his mind, like trying on clothes that should fit but had been hanging in a closet for decades, as she carefully spread documents across the mahogany table. His daughter, Lily Rose Sophie. She was beautiful, he realized with a parent's pride that felt both brand new and ancient. She had Alina's graceful features softened by his own broader bone structure, creating a face that was uniquely hers. The way she moved her hands when she talked, quick and expressive, that was pure Alina. But the analytical way she organized the papers, creating a clear visual timeline, that was all him. I've been piecing this together for 5 years, Sophie said, her voice more controlled now though her eyes still shimmered with emotion. Since Mom died, she left me boxes of documents, letters, everything she'd collected over the years trying to find you. Marcus watched as she pulled out a faded composition notebook, its cover worn soft with age and handling. This was her diary. She started writing in it right after I was born, documenting everything. She was terrified she'd forget details that might be important. Sophie opened to a page marked with a yellow sticky note and began to read, her voice taking on the cadence of her mother's words. February 14, 2003, they took my baby. The nurses came in after the C-section and said Lily Rose needed immediate specialized care. I was weak, so weak, but I heard her crying. My daughter was alive and crying. They promised Marcus could see her, that we'd be reunited within hours once I was stable. But then everything changed. A different doctor came, not Dr. Morrison who delivered Lily Rose. This man was cold, official. He said there had been complications, catastrophic he called it. He said my daughter had died, but I heard her. I heard her crying as they took her away. I screamed for Marcus. They sedated me. When I woke, they told me Marcus had already made arrangements, that he couldn't bear to see me, that the grief was too much. They said he'd signed papers for immediate cremation and left instructions that I should be discharged as soon as stable. I don't believe them. Marcus would never abandon me. Something is wrong. Something is terribly, horribly wrong. Sophie's voice wavered, but she continued turning pages, each entry more heartbreaking than the last. Alina's determination to find Marcus, to understand what had happened. Her discovery weeks later that she'd been transferred to a different hospital in the middle of the night while sedated. Her awakening to find herself not in St. Catherine's, but in a small community hospital 3 hours away, with no records of her ever being at St. Catherine's at all. Marcus listened, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Rage built in his chest like a living thing, hot and consuming. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had torn his family apart with precision and malice. She tried to find you, Sophie continued, pulling out more documents. But every trail went cold. Marcus Chen, the programmer who'd worked at Tech Vision Solutions, had vanished from public records. The company had been sold, restructured. By the time she tracked down the new corporate entity, you were listed as a silent partner who'd moved overseas. The business address led nowhere. The phone numbers were disconnected. Because Richard handled everything, Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. My business partner, after Alina. After I thought Alina and you had died, I couldn't function, couldn't think. Richard stepped up, or so I thought. He managed the business restructuring, the investor relations, even my personal affairs. He said I needed to disappear from public view to grieve properly, that the media attention would destroy me. Marcus stood and paced to the window, looking out at the Valentine's Day evening, couples walking hand in hand below on the street. He insisted on handling all the hospital records, the death certificates, the cremation. Said it was too painful for me to deal with. I let him because I was shattered. I trusted him. Did he have a reason to do this? Sophie asked carefully. Marcus turned back to face her, memories clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Richard was in love with Alina. Before she and I got together, he'd pursued her aggressively. She turned him down, made it clear she wasn't interested. When she chose me instead, he seemed to take it well. He was my best man at our wedding, congratulated us, seemed genuinely happy for us. People can hide their feelings, Sophie said quietly, especially when those feelings are ugly. Marcus nodded slowly. The company exploded in value about 8 months after Alina's supposed death. Richard had been negotiating with a major investor, some deal he said would save us from bankruptcy. The day the contract came through, I was too numb to care. He handled everything, said I should sign the papers without worrying about the details. I trusted him. What happened to your share of the company? I got 40%. Richard got 60%. He said it was because he'd brought in the investor, done all the work while I was grieving. It seemed fair at the time. I didn't care about money. I cared about nothing. Sophie pulled out another document, a birth certificate. But unlike the death certificate Marcus had been shown 23 years ago, this one was real, official, with raised seals and proper signatures. It listed baby girl Chen, born 11:47 p.m. on February 14, 2003, to Alina Marie Chen and Marcus James Chen. Mother alive. Baby alive. I found this 5 years ago in a safety deposit box my mother left me, Sophie said. Along with this. She handed him another paper, a transfer document from St. Catherine's Hospital to Mercy General, dated February 15, 2003, listing Alina Chen as patient and noting infant remains with mother. Marcus took the document with shaking hands. Mercy General, that's 3 hours north of here. That's where Mom woke up. She had no memory of the transfer. They told her she'd been brought in as an emergency from a car accident. Her medical records from St. Catherine's had supposedly been lost in a records room fire. By the time she was well enough to investigate, everything had been sanitized. And the baby, you. Sophie's expression darkened. According to what I've been able to piece together, I was placed with a foster family that night. Emergency placement, no proper paperwork. The family was told my mother had died in childbirth and there was no father on record. They were kind people. They raised me thinking they were doing the right thing. They had no idea I'd been stolen. But Alina survived. She came looking for you. By the time she was well enough to search, I'd already been placed in the system under a different name. Sophie Morrison. They used the name of the doctor who originally delivered me, probably as some kind of sick joke. Mom spent years going through foster care records, but without my original name or proper documentation, the trail was impossible to follow. Marcus sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. How did you finally connect? Sophie gave him a bittersweet smile. DNA. 2 years ago, I submitted my DNA to one of those ancestry websites, just curious about my heritage. I got a hit for a second cousin, someone on your side of the family. When I reached out to them, they mentioned the Chen family tragedy, how Marcus Chen's wife and daughter had died on Valentine's Day 2003. The dates matched. The location matched. And I started to wonder. She pulled out more papers, printed family tree results, genetic matches, email correspondences. I spent 2 years investigating before I was sure, before I felt ready to approach you, because I knew this would either be the best moment of your life or a cruel hoax that would destroy you all over again. You could have called, emailed, hired lawyers to verify. Would you have believed a random email claiming your dead daughter was alive? Sophie asked gently. Or would you have dismissed it as a scam, someone trying to exploit your grief for money? Marcus knew she was right. He would have had his lawyers shut it down immediately, protecting himself from false hope. I needed to see you, Sophie continued. Needed to look you in the eye and show you the truth in person. So I got a job here, knowing you came every Valentine's Day. and I waited for the right moment. Marcus reached across the table and took his daughter's hand, really held it for the first time in her life. Her fingers were small in his, but strong. "What happened to your foster family?" "They died when I was 16. Car accident. That's when I went into the system officially and took back the name Morrison, thinking it might help Mom find me somehow. I never knew my real name was Lily Rose until Mom's letter." "Alina's letter. You mentioned she wrote you something before she died." Sophie nodded and pulled out one more envelope, this one sealed. "She made me promise not to open it until I found you. She said some things needed to be said when we were both together, even if she couldn't be there to say them." Marcus stared at the envelope, Alina's handwriting on the front. "For Marcus and Lily Rose, on the day you find each other." "I think we should read it," Sophie whispered, "together." But before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt ice water flood his veins. The message was from Richard Ashford. "Saw your reservation at Maison Lumiere tonight. Mind if I stop by for a drink? We need to discuss the quarterly reports." Richard, who lived on the opposite side of the city, who never worked on Valentine's Day, who somehow knew exactly where Marcus would be tonight. Marcus looked up at Sophie, a terrible understanding dawning. "He knows. Somehow Richard knows you found me." Sophie's face paled. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but Richard didn't just steal my family and my company. He's been monitoring me for 23 years, making sure his secret stayed buried." Marcus stood, a cold fury settling over him. "And now we're going to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy goes." Marcus's penthouse apartment overlooked the glittering city, but he barely noticed the view as he paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophie sat on the leather sofa, Alina's sealed letter resting on the coffee table before them like a ticking bomb neither was quite ready to detonate. Between them on the glass surface lay spread the evidence of 23 years of deception: documents, photos, medical records, and now, Marcus's own files pulled from his private safe. After leaving Maison Lumiere through a side exit to avoid Richard, they'd come here to regroup and investigate. Marcus had spent the last 2 hours making discreet phone calls to lawyers, private investigators, and old contacts in the medical field. What they were uncovering made the initial deception look like just the tip of a very dark iceberg. "Dr. Harrison Mills," Marcus said, tapping a photo on his laptop screen. "He was the doctor who told me both you and Alina had died. I remember him clearly, mid-50s, gray hair, very official manner. But according to St. Catherine's Hospital records, no Dr. Harrison Mills has ever been on staff there." Sophie leaned forward. "Let me see." Marcus turned the screen toward her. She studied the image he'd pulled from a medical licensing database, then shook her head. "That's not a doctor. That's Gregory Wade. He was Richard's college roommate. I found his name in some of Mom's notes but didn't understand the connection." "He's not in any medical database," Marcus confirmed grimly. "He's a corporate lawyer specializing in hostile takeovers and asset protection, and according to his financial records," he pulled up another screen, "he received a $500,000 wire transfer from a shell company 3 days after your supposed death, a shell company that traces back to Richard Ashford." The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus pulled out his own set of documents, the death certificates he'd been given 23 years ago. Under his scrutiny now, with Sophie's real birth certificate for comparison, the forgery was obvious. Different paper quality, slightly wrong government seals, signatures that didn't match the registry of doctors on staff that night. "He was so careful," Marcus murmured, "so methodical. I was devastated, not thinking clearly, and Richard used that. He brought me the papers when I was barely functional, assured me he'd handle everything. I signed without really looking." Sophie pulled up something on her own laptop. "I think I found how he found out about me. Look at this." She showed him a screen capture from the Ancestry website she'd used. 3 months ago, someone with administrative access viewed my DNA profile and the family match I'd gotten. The access was logged from an IP address that belongs to Tech Vision Solutions, your old company. "Richard still has board access to the parent company," Marcus said, his voice tight. "He must have set up alerts for any genetic matches to the Chen family line. When you popped up, he knew immediately." "But why?" Sophie asked, frustration clear in her voice. Why go to all this trouble? What did he gain? Marcus walked to his safe and pulled out a file he hadn't looked at in over a decade, the original partnership agreement for Tech Vision Solutions. He spread it on the table, running his finger down the clauses until he found what he was looking for. Clause 17b. In the event of a partner's incapacitation or inability to fulfill duties for a period exceeding 6 months, their shares may be redistributed by majority board vote. We only had 2 board members, Richard and me, and there's more. He flipped to another section. Clause 23a. In the event of a partner's death, their shares transfer to designated beneficiary or, if no beneficiary is listed, to the remaining partner after a probationary period. You didn't list a beneficiary. I was going to list Alina after the baby was born. We talked about it during her pregnancy, but I never got around to updating the paperwork. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Richard knew that. We discussed it at the office just weeks before Alina went into labor. Sophie's eyes widened as understanding dawned. So if you died of grief, he'd get everything. But you didn't die, you just became a non-functional shell of yourself. Exactly. For 8 months after losing you and Alina, I barely came into the office. Couldn't focus, couldn't work. Richard ran everything. During that time, he restructured the entire company, brought in the investor that supposedly saved us, and when I finally surfaced enough to sign papers, my 40% was already diluted down from the original 50-50 split we'd started with. Marcus pulled up financial records spanning 2 decades. But here's what really happened. There was no investor crisis. The company was doing fine. Richard created an artificial emergency, brought in his own shadow investors, probably using the money he'd saved by not having to pay me my full share, and restructured everything to his benefit. By the time I was aware enough to understand what had happened, the papers were signed and legally binding. That's fraud, Sophie said. Multiple counts of it. It's also incredibly difficult to prove after 23 years, especially when I signed everything willingly, even if under emotional duress. Marcus's jaw tightened. Richard didn't just want the company. He wanted to punish me, punish Alina for choosing me over him. Punish both of us by destroying our family and making me suffer for years while he profited from my grief. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then reached for Alina's diary again. There's something Mom wrote that I didn't understand before. Listen to this, from April 2003, 2 months after I was born. I saw him today, Richard Ashford. He was at Mercy General talking to the administrator in the hallway. He didn't see me, but I heard him mention Marcus's name. Said something about maintaining the necessary separation and making sure the channels stay closed. When I tried to approach him, he disappeared. By the time I got to the administrator's office, I was told there was no record of Richard Ashford visiting. But I saw him. I know I did. He was monitoring Alina, Marcus breathed, making sure she couldn't find me, probably paying off hospital administrators to lose records, redirect her inquiries, keep us separated. Sophie flipped through more entries. It continues for years, weird coincidences, dead ends. Every time Mom got close to finding information about you or Tech Vision, something would happen. Records would be lost, offices would be closed, contact information would change. Marcus felt sick. He spent 23 years actively keeping us apart. This wasn't just a one-time act of cruelty. It was sustained, calculated psychological warfare. The question is, Sophie said, what do we do now? You said yourself that proving fraud after all this time is nearly impossible. And without solid evidence, Richard can claim everything was legitimate business practices. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's where you're wrong. We have something Richard doesn't know we have. What? You, Marcus gestured to his daughter. You are living, breathing proof that the death certificate was fraudulent. Once we establish that you're my daughter through DNA testing, which will be indisputable, we can prove that Richard knowingly presented false documentation to me. That opens up everything else for investigation. Insurance fraud, identity theft, falsifying medical records, conspiracy. The charges will multiply. Sophie looked uncertain. But that means going public, media attention, your privacy destroyed. Are you ready for that? Marcus thought about 23 years of Valentine's days spent alone, of Alina searching futilely while he grieved unnecessarily, of Sophie growing up without parents because of one man's jealousy and greed. Richard took everything from us, he said quietly. Our family, our time together. Alina died still searching for me, and I lived thinking both of you were dead. He stole 23 years of our lives. So yes, I'm ready to burn his entire world down if it means getting justice. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Richard. Marcus, I know about the girl. We need to talk. Some things are better left buried. Think about your reputation. Think about what this investigation will do to your empire. Marcus showed Sophie the message. She paled. Is that a threat? It's desperation. He knows I've found you, and he knows that everything he's built is suddenly vulnerable. Marcus typed back. We have nothing to talk about, but I'll see you at the Innovation Summit next week. I'm giving the keynote speech, remember. I think I'll have some interesting things to share with the tech community. The Innovation Summit was the industry's biggest annual event, broadcast live to millions, attended by every major player in Silicon Valley. Richard would be there as a board member of TechVision's parent company. Richard's response came quickly. Don't do this, Marcus. I have lawyers, I have resources. You can't prove anything. Marcus typed, I have my daughter, that's all the proof I need. He put the phone down and looked at Sophie. Before we go forward with this, I need to know, are you ready? This is going to be intense, invasive. The media will dig into your entire life. Every decision, every relationship, every moment will be scrutinized. Sophie reached across the table and picked up Alina's sealed letter. Before I answer, I think we need to read this, together, like Mom wanted. Marcus nodded. His hands shook slightly as Sophie carefully opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in Alina's familiar handwriting. The date at the top read, May 15, 2020, 5 years ago, shortly before Alina's death. Sophie began to read aloud, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. My dearest Marcus and my darling Lily Rose, if you're reading this together, then my prayers have been answered. You found each other. I can rest now, knowing that my death wasn't in vain, that the years I spent searching weren't wasted. Marcus, my love, I need you to know that I never stopped believing in you. Not for 1 second, not in all the years we were apart. I knew in my soul that you didn't abandon us. I knew someone had torn us apart deliberately. I just couldn't prove it, couldn't find the way back to you. The cancer is taking me now, and I'm running out of time. But I've spent the last 5 years compiling everything I could find, every shred of evidence, every lead. It all points to Richard Ashford. I can't prove it in court, but I know it's true. He took our life together because he couldn't have what he wanted. He couldn't have me, so he made sure I couldn't have you. Lily Rose, my beautiful daughter, my strong girl, I've told you since you were small that your father loved you, that he loves you still wherever he is. Now you know it's true. Marcus, she has your brilliant mind and your kind heart. She has my stubbornness and my determination. She's the best of both of us. I'm not afraid to die because I know what I'm leaving behind. You two have each other now. You can build the relationship that was stolen from us. You can have the family we should have had. But Marcus, I have one request. Don't let your need for revenge consume you the way my search consumed me. Richard Ashford is a sick, twisted man who couldn't handle rejection. He's already stolen 23 years of our lives. Don't give him the rest of yours. Get justice, yes. Hold him accountable, absolutely. But then let it go. Build a life with our daughter. Be the father you didn't get to be. Create new memories, new traditions, new stories. And Lily Rose, my darling girl, give him a chance. I know you've lived without a father for so long that the idea of having one might feel foreign, but he's worth it. We were so in love, your father and I, the kind of love that people write stories about. He would have moved mountains for you. In some ways, he already has. He spent 23 years honoring our memory every Valentine's Day. Now honor him by letting him be your dad. I have to go now. The pain is getting worse and the medicine makes it hard to write. But I want you to know, both of you, that I died happy. Because I knew that someday, somehow, you'd find each other. And that knowledge made every moment of searching, every dead end, every disappointment worth it. Love isn't defeated by distance or time or even death. Love endures. Our love endures. Always and forever, Elena/Mom. The room was silent except for Sophie's quiet crying and the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. He stood and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. 23 years of grief, of loneliness, of believing himself a widower. It all came crashing down at once. Alina had known. She'd known he didn't abandon them. She'd spent her final years making sure Sophie knew too. Sophie came to stand beside him, and without words, Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms. They stood there, two people who should have known each other their entire lives, finally together, mourning the woman who'd never stopped fighting to make this moment possible. "We do what Mom said," Sophie finally whispered against his shoulder. "We get justice, but then we build our life together." Marcus pulled back and looked at his daughter, really looked at her. "You're sure about going public, about the summit?" Sophie's eyes hardened with determination, Alina's stubbornness just like her mother had written. "I've spent 23 years not knowing my father. Richard Ashford stole that from us. He needs to answer for it, not just legally but publicly. The world needs to know what kind of monster he is." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we do this right. We document everything, get legal counsel, and we make sure that when we expose him, it's airtight." "What about his threat, his lawyers and resources?" Marcus smiled grimly. "I've spent 23 years building my empire, Sophie, and I did it while carrying the weight of losing everything I loved. Imagine what I can do now that I have something to fight for." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "David, it's Marcus Chen. I need you to assemble the team: corporate law, criminal law, media relations, and our best investigators. Something's come up that requires immediate attention. No, not tomorrow, tonight. I don't care if it's Valentine's Day. This is bigger than any holiday." As Marcus spoke, outlining the situation in clinical terms, Sophie watched her father transform. This was Marcus Chen, the tech titan, the billionaire who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence, the man who commanded boardrooms and conquered markets. But underneath, that was also her father, a man who'd been broken by lies and was now putting himself back together with the truth. They spent the rest of the night strategizing with Marcus's legal team, who arrived disheveled but focused. By dawn, they had a plan. Comprehensive DNA testing, document authentication, private investigators dispatching to interview everyone involved in the original deception, subpoenas being prepared, and a criminal complaint drafted for the district attorney. But more importantly, they had something Richard Ashford couldn't buy or manipulate: the truth, and the determination to see it revealed. As the sun rose over the city, Marcus stood with Sophie on his balcony, watching the world wake up to a day that would change everything. "Mom would be proud," Sophie said softly. Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "She already is. That's why she brought you to me." The Innovation Summit was in 6 days. That was all the time Richard Ashford had left before his entire world came crashing down. And Marcus Chen would be there to watch it burn. The Innovation Summit stage lights were blinding, but Marcus Chen stood at the podium with absolute calm. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the TechVision Solutions logo, the company that had made him billions but had been built on a foundation of lies. Before him, 3,000 of the tech industry's most influential people filled the auditorium, with millions more watching the live stream worldwide. And in the front row, Richard Ashford sat rigid in his seat, his face a mask of forced confidence. Sophie stood in the wings, just out of sight but where Marcus could see her if he glanced left. She wore a simple navy dress, her chestnut hair down around her shoulders. In her hands she clutched Alina's diary and the stack of authenticated documents that had cost Marcus $500,000 in expedited legal fees to verify over the past 6 days. It had been the longest, most intense week of Marcus's life, longer even than the week after Alina's supposed death, because this time he'd been focused and purposeful rather than shattered. DNA tests had confirmed with 99.99% certainty that Sophie was his biological daughter. Handwriting experts had authenticated Alina's diary. Forensic document analysts had proven the death certificates were forgeries. Private investigators had tracked down 2 of the nurses on duty the night Sophie was born, and both had signed affidavits stating that the baby had survived and been healthy, and that they'd been paid off by an intermediary working for Richard Ashford to falsify records. Gregory Wade, the fake doctor, had been located in the Cayman Islands and, when presented with evidence of his fraud, had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. He'd sung like a canary, detailing exactly how Richard had orchestrated the entire deception, from the forged death certificates to the illegal transfer of Alina to another hospital, to the falsification of Sophie's placement records. The district attorney had enough evidence to charge Richard Ashford with conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, falsifying government documents, and criminal racketeering. Civil suits would follow for damages that could potentially reach into the billions. But Marcus wanted more than legal justice. He wanted the world to know what Richard had done. He wanted Richard's reputation destroyed the way Richard had tried to destroy Marcus's life. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, amplified through the auditorium sound system. 23 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. My wife Alina, pregnant with our first child, died during childbirth, or so I was told. The audience shifted, confused. This wasn't the typical Innovation Summit keynote about new technology and market disruptions. Richard Ashford started to stand, but two men in dark suits, FBI agents, Marcus knew, had quietly taken positions at either end of his row. Richard sat back down. "I spent 23 years believing I was a widower," Marcus continued. "Every Valentine's Day, I would sit alone in a restaurant, punishing myself for working late the night my family died. The guilt consumed me. The grief defined me. Everything I built afterward, every company, every innovation, every billion-dollar deal, was hollow because I was working for ghosts." Marcus paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the audience. "But 6 days ago, on Valentine's Day 2026, a young waitress approached my table with a rose, and she said something that changed everything. They didn't die." The screen behind him changed, now showing a photo of him and Alina on their wedding day, the same photo Sophie had shown him that night. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This is Alina Chen, my wife. She didn't die in childbirth. She was drugged, transferred to another hospital without her consent, and told that I had abandoned her. Death certificates were forged, medical records were falsified, an elaborate conspiracy was constructed to keep us apart." Another image appeared, Sophie's birth certificate, the real one. "This is my daughter, Lily Rose Chen, who was taken from the hospital and placed illegally into foster care under a false name. She didn't die. She grew up without parents, believing she'd been abandoned. My wife spent 20 years searching for me before dying of cancer 5 years ago, never knowing that I'd spent those same 20 years grieving for her." The audience was dead silent now, hanging on every word. Richard's face had gone from red to white, his hands gripping the armrests of his seat. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice hardening. "Why would someone do this? Why would someone tear apart a family, forge government documents, pay off medical professionals, and orchestrate a conspiracy spanning more than 2 decades?" He paused, then pointed directly at Richard Ashford. "Because that man couldn't handle rejection. Because when Alina chose me over him, he decided that if he couldn't have her, I couldn't either. And as a bonus, he restructured our company to steal my share while I was incapacitated with grief." Richard shot to his feet. "This is slander. I'm calling my lawyers." "Your lawyers have already been contacted by the FBI," Marcus said calmly. "As have you, Mr. Ashford, though you chose to attend this summit rather than report for questioning. Federal agents are waiting in the lobby with a warrant for your arrest on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of government documents, and identity theft." The screen changed again, now showing authenticated copies of the forged death certificates side by side with the real documents, highlighted sections showing the inconsistencies. "We have testimony from Gregory Wade, the man you hired to impersonate a doctor. We have affidavits from nurses you bribed. We have financial records showing wire transfers from shell companies you control. We have 23 years of sustained obstruction and interference documented in my late wife's diary." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "You didn't just steal money or shares in a company, Richard. You stole years. You stole the chance for Alina to see her daughter grow up. You stole the chance for me to be a father. You stole my daughter's childhood. You tried to steal our future." Sophie stepped onto the stage then, moving to stand beside Marcus. The resemblance was unmistakable. The cameras caught it immediately, and gasps echoed through the auditorium. "This is Lily Rose Chen, my daughter, who I'm meeting as an adult when I should have known her from birth. We have 6 days together. 6 days to start building a relationship that should have been 23 years in the making. Richard was shouting now, security converging on him, but his words were drowned out by the uproar in the auditorium. Marcus put his arm around Sophie's shoulders. My wife Alina left us a letter before she died. She asked us to get justice but not to let revenge consume us. She asked us to build the life we should have had. He looked directly at the camera, knowing Richard could see him on the screens even as agents moved to arrest him. So we will. We'll get our justice through the courts, but more importantly, we'll live. We'll build new memories. We'll be a family. The screen behind them changed one final time, showing Alina's photograph, a candid shot of her laughing, her amber eyes bright with joy. This innovation summit is usually about technological advancement, Marcus said. But today, I want to talk about a different kind of innovation. The innovation of truth defeating lies, of justice prevailing over conspiracy, of love enduring beyond death and distance and time. He looked at Sophie, and she nodded, pulling out Alina's diary. My mother wrote something in her last entry, Sophie said into the microphone, her voice shaking but clear. She wrote, "Love isn't defeated by distance or time or even death. Love endures, our love endures." She was right, because her love brought us together. Her determination, her documentation, her refusal to give up, that's what made this moment possible. Behind them, security was escorting Richard Ashford from the auditorium in handcuffs, cameras flashing, journalists shouting questions. But Marcus and Sophie didn't turn to watch. They kept their eyes forward, on the audience, on the future. TechVision Solutions was built on a lie, Marcus said. So effective today, I'm resigning from the board. I'm selling all my shares and using the proceeds to establish the Alina Chen Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to reuniting families separated by fraud, corruption, or illegal adoption. We'll provide resources for DNA testing, investigative services, legal support, and counseling. The audience erupted in applause, not the polite golf claps typical of corporate events, but genuine, emotional applause. People were crying, standing, moved by the raw humanity of what they just witnessed. Marcus and Sophie left the stage together, father and daughter, as news of Richard Ashford's arrest spread through social media like wildfire. The story would dominate headlines for weeks. Tech titan exposes 23-year conspiracy. Billionaire reunited with daughter on Valentine's Day. The Valentine's Day miracle that brought down a tech giant. But for Marcus and Sophie, the real story was just beginning. The restaurant was different this time. Not Maison Lumiere, but a smaller, warmer place called Alina's, named in honor of the woman who'd never stopped fighting for her family. Marcus had purchased the struggling establishment and transformed it into a nonprofit venture, employing foster youth and providing job training. Sophie worked there part-time while finishing her master's degree in social work, specialized in family reunification. Marcus sat at a corner table, but he wasn't alone. With him were his mother and father, Sophie's grandparents who'd never known their granddaughter existed, his sister, his nephew, a whole family rebuilt from the ashes of lies. On the wall hung a photograph of Alina, smiling, her amber eyes watching over them all. Richard Ashford had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The civil suits had resulted in a $2.3 billion judgment against him and the dissolution of multiple shell companies. Every penny recovered had gone to the Alina Chen Foundation, which in its first year had already helped reunite 17 families separated by illegal adoptions or fraudulent documentation. Marcus had retired from active business, spending his time on the foundation and, most importantly, getting to know his daughter. They traveled to Alina's grave together, planting roses and telling her stories. They'd gone through photo albums, Sophie learning about the woman who'd been her mother. They'd celebrated Sophie's birthday, the first time Marcus had ever been able to do so. They'd cried together, laughed together, argued about silly things and important things, all the ordinary moments of a parent-child relationship compressed into one intense year of catching up. And every Valentine's Day going forward they'd spend together, not in grief but in celebration, celebrating Alina's memory, celebrating their reunion, celebrating the truth that had set them free. As Sophie brought Marcus his coffee, She still insisted on occasionally waiting tables, saying it kept her grounded. She placed a red rose beside his cup. "Happy Valentine's Day, Dad," she said. Marcus smiled, really smiled, in a way he hadn't for 23 years. "Happy Valentine's Day, Lily Rose." Love wasn't defeated. It never had been. It had just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. What would you have done in Sophie's shoes? Finding out that everything you'd been told about your family was a lie, discovering that your father, a billionaire you'd only known as a lonely customer, had spent 23 years believing you were dead. Would you have had the courage to walk up to him with that rose and reveal the truth that could shatter both your worlds? This story reminds us that justice can prevail, even when the odds seem insurmountable. That love truly does endure beyond time, distance, and even death. That one person's determination, like Alina's refusal to stop searching, can change everything. And that sometimes the most powerful innovations aren't technological at all, but human. The innovation of truth, of family, of refusing to let lies define your reality. If this story made your blood boil at Richard's betrayal, if it made you tear up when Marcus and Sophie finally embraced, if it restored even a fraction of your faith in justice and happy endings, then I need you to do something for me right now. Drop a like on this video if you believe families torn apart by lies deserve justice. Comment, "Love endures," below if this story touched your heart. Tell me, have you or someone you know ever dealt with family separation, adoption fraud, or the pain of losing someone you thought was gone forever? Your stories matter, and this community is here for them. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're bringing you more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles can happen, that families can heal, that justice, though sometimes delayed, is not denied. So I'm asking you directly, are you with us? If the answer is yes, prove it. Smash that like button until it turns blue. Comment below, don't just watch and leave. Subscribe and become part of this community. Because Alina Chen fought for 20 years to find her family, the least we can do is spend 10 seconds fighting for her story to be heard. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of something bigger than entertainment. You're part of a movement that says love wins, truth matters, and family is worth fighting for.